Hi guys, Ryan here, and in this video, I'm going to show you how the solo and mute buttons work on the RØDECaster Pro and show you how you can use them to ensure that your podcast sounds even and controlled. At the bottom of each channel, you can see these two buttons for solo and mute. The red button is mute. This will remove that channel from your podcast even if the fader is pushed up. This can be useful if, for example, you have already set the level of a source, perhaps a phone interview, and you then want to mute that audio until you need it, but without having to move the fader from its position. You can simply hit the red mute button until you're ready, then press it again to unmute that audio when you want it in your podcast. The green button is for solo. What this does is it allows you to hear just that source in your headphones. This is for when you want to check a particular source sounds correct without affecting your podcast recording. If you press one of the green solo buttons, you will hear just that source in your headphones. Remember, this will not affect your podcast recording, only what you're hearing in your headphones. Now, the solo function only affects headphone channel 1, so your guests will continue to hear the full podcast in their headphones, even if you activate the solo button as the podcast host. You can press the solo button on more than one channel if, for example, you want to hear several of the audio sources at once. When you press solo, you hear the source on its own, but at the level that it appears in your podcast. This means that if the fader is all the way down and you press the solo button for that channel, you won't actually hear any audio. If you do want to audition the audio from a channel without recording it into your podcast, you can do it with a combination of the mute and solo buttons. First, mute the channel that you want to audition using the red mute button. Then push up the fader. This will not affect your podcast recording, as remember, channels that are muted are not recorded. Now, if you press the green solo button for that channel, you'll hear the audio from that source in your headphones, but without that source actually being recorded to the podcast because the channel has been muted to the main recording. Now, this is a great way, for example, to check the audio feed from a phone interview before you actually unmute that channel and add it into your podcast. Now, using the mute and solo buttons in combinations across several channels at the same time can get a little bit confusing. So remember, if what you're hearing in your headphones isn't exactly what you expect, you can check that all of the green solo buttons are off and that any channels you want to record are not muted. For most of the time, you probably won't have any of the mute or solo functions enabled. And one final thing, if you do have the solo function activated on any channels, you also won't be able to hear the podcast playback in your headphones if you're listening back to your podcast after you finish your recording. So again, if what you're hearing in your headphones doesn't seem right, just check the status of all of these buttons and if necessary, turn them all off. Many thanks and happy podcasting.